Good morning, Slovenia. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm thrilled to be here and reunite with old friends. And I have a lot of material to cover, so I'm gonna fly through this. Feel free to, I'll be around for the next 2 days if you have any questions, want to follow up. So, as he said, I'm the principal investigator at Scottsdale Research Institute. We're doing nonprofit drug development research on cannabis flower. So we do FDA controlled trials looking at smoked and vaporized flower or dry bud material, looking at it as a medicine for treating PTSD, for treating chronic pain and breakthrough pain, and looking at smoked and vaporized flower as a substitution for opioid dependence. So you can see our hope is to try to put cannabis flower through the entire FDA drug development process so that we can force insurance companies, health insurance, to have to pay for flower the same way they pay for conventional pharmaceuticals. But here's the other reasons that we study flower. There are a lot of scientists who think that this is a waste. Most scientists want to study ratios of cannabinoids and terpenes that can be patented and make money from this. And we choose to focus on flower because we believe, first of all, that flower is the medicine, that it's the most efficacious form of the plant. And all of these other extracts and concentrates and tinctures are important options for patients, but we believe they're suboptimal versions of the natural flower. Still in the US, flower is the cheapest version also, so this has the potential, to provide cannabis flower bud to patients will help reduce healthcare costs globally. And also we're eager to see flower get through the FDA process because it will also open the door for other plant-based medicines, right? Once we get cannabis flower approved by the FDA and on the market, it will set the most precedence for other medically active plants like psilocybin, ibogaine, ayahuasca, all kinds of plants that are very important, that have therapeutic value, but are currently prohibited by our governments. So let me talk about, this is the study that we're best known for, but as I said, we're doing a lot of different clinical trials now, but this PTSD trial got so much attention for a lot of reasons that I'm going to share with you. You can see this is an FDA phase 2 trial, right? So it's an early phase drug development trial. It's the first and only randomized controlled trial in the world looking at how cannabis treats PTSD. And when I was back in Slovenia several years ago, at that point, I had not even started the study yet. Remember, I was still fighting with the government to get the trial underway. I'm proud to tell you that after 10 years of struggle with our government at all levels, we finally completed this study this year. And so I want to talk with you a little bit about the outcomes. So you can see part of the reason it took 10 years to do the study is because at one point, about midway through, the University of Arizona, that was where I was on faculty, and the Institutional Review Board, or the Ethics Committee, had approved the study to be done at the university, but the university president at that time was very fearful of this work and felt it might harm their federal funding. And so they ultimately terminated me and the clinical trial from the university, and it turned out to be a huge gift for us. Sometimes people might view this as professionally devastating, but in our case, it was one of my proudest professional achievements to stand up to these institutions, to urge them to remind them of their roots. Remember when universities used to take pride in hosting or creating a safe home for controversial research, but it's not that way in the US. We still have the majority of universities that are running scared from this work, and it's really disappointing. But it turned out to be a victory for us, because what happened was we got so much media coverage over years about us being fired, and it ended up, shining a spotlight on the barriers to cannabis research in the U.S. and the myriad ways that our U.S. government has systematically impeded cannabis efficacy research for so many decades, meaning they fully allow cannabis safety studies, right? Studies looking at harmful side effects of cannabis or addiction potential. But any studies that dare to ask about cannabis as a medicine, how does cannabis treat this illness or that symptom, those are the type of trials that were blocked by our government for so long and continue to be impeded. But we were very fortunate. All of this drama in the media caused a lot of high-profile people like Andy Weil. Many of you know he's a Harvard-trained physician and botanist who came to our defense. He was the chairman of the department at the University of Integrative Medicine, and he wrote an open letter to our president in the media condemning her decision to terminate the study. It was very powerful, and all kinds of celebrities going to bat for us, John Oliver, trying to say, that recognizing that this was an attack on scientific freedom, and that they were very sympathetic. So ultimately, we ended up in our own private institute, and I want to emphasize that it is possible in the U.S. to do cannabis clinical trials with no assistance from a university or a hospital, because in the U.S., we have a private IRB committee, right? But we have a private ethics committee, so you don't have to be affiliated with that, and that's what we went through. It's the same rules as the university IRBs. They're all federally regulated, but that helped us to keep the study moving forward. And by the way, that is how, let me see if I can go back here. That's how Dodger, this is the facility dog at the laboratory. So Dodger's job is to comfort the patients who are stuck there for hours smoking cannabis, and it's very interesting. The FDA requires that we monitor these patients for 5 hours after smoking, because they feel this drug is so dangerous, and that there may be some serious adverse events. So these people are stuck, languishing there for so many hours, and he's there to entertain them. But this is the DEA Schedule I license in the US that the scientists there call this the golden ticket, because it allows you the privilege of purchasing cannabis from our federal government. So it took me 7 years to get this document, and now it's been renewed several times. But the point is that, as soon as we got this, we immediately moved to order about 8 kilograms of cannabis from our federal government. And I was thinking surely it would be come by like armored truck or some very secure, but there's the FedEx guy, shows up at the lab. He has no idea he's even transporting cannabis. He's really mystified why everybody's running around with these cameras. But what was sad to see after so many years of battling the government, we end up opening up this cooler, which shows, frozen cannabis that has been sitting in the lockers of the Research Triangle for years. And when you open this, you see that these are like Ziploc bags full of green powder that's moldy and diluted with a lot of extraneous plant material, stems, sticks, seeds, leaves. And even though we have our own Schedule I license as an analytical laboratory, we chose to send out the study drug to 3 different Schedule I labs that were independent of ours to understand what was in it. I want to point out at the top of this slide, you see the old pictures from previous studies where you see that this is clearly full of a lot of extraneous plant, not just the flowering tops of the plant, right? That's what we want to study, is the flower. But what we get from our government for the last 51 years is a mishmash of all this junk. They throw the entire plant into the grinder. So when you're trying to study efficacy of cannabis, you end up with this very diluted material. So as we were criticizing the government so openly about the quality of the study drug, this last batch you see on the bottom is now a green powder. So they just pulverize it into a powder because they were so sick of hearing us, criticizing them, that they decided to just demolish it into this powder so we couldn't discern what's in it. But you can still see that there's all this extra material that's not flour, and we worry that that's harming the results of clinical trials in the US. All the scientists that I speak with are very concerned about this. So you can see from this headline, the results of our 3 rounds of independent testing showed excessively high levels of mold in all the batches. And back then, we did not know how, our laboratories did not have the capacity to test for mycotoxin. But those of you who know what mycotoxin is, basically, it's like the poop, the excrement that comes from uncontrolled mold. And it's known to be, very toxic to humans. And so it's really discouraging. How do I, as a physician, knowingly hand out moldy weed, moldy cannabis to our revered military veterans in the study? It was really a tough problem. But ultimately, we moved forward. We just declared that the study drug was contaminated with mold and other microbials, and added that to the informed consent and moved forward. And you can see there is the binder for the last veteran, the last military veteran in the study. We have not yet published the data. We're preparing, we're just putting the finishing touches on the manuscript now, so I can't share all the detailed data with you, but I can tell you in generalities what we saw. And overall, I would just say that the results were very disappointing. The reason we fought so hard to do this study is because, in the US, we have an epidemic of veteran suicide, where 20 plus veterans kill themselves in the US every day, and we believe it's actually much higher than that. That's just what the government has been able to report on. When a veteran kills himself from overdose, it's considered an accident. It's not even listed as a suicide, but it's a real problem, a real public health crisis, because we don't have any solutions for PTSD. And to point out, in the last 18 years in the US, we have not had a single new treatment approved for PTSD. Nothing since Prozac and Paxil and Zoloft. Nothing. So that's why it was so crucial to see if cannabis may be a new treatment. But sadly, we believe that the results of our study were undermined by this low-quality study drug. Like the veterans say, it's like garbage in, garbage out. You're not going to see a better result when your study drug is so suboptimal. But basically, the good news is all the groups improved. So high THC batch, the different generic batches from the government, high THC improved, high CBD improved, 1-to-1 ratio of THC to CBD, all improved, but none of them improved more than placebo, so considered a negative study. So you'll see this data come out soon, but I want you to be aware of the fact that we are working feverishly to get approvals to redo this study with real-world cannabis. And let me just share a couple things with you, as I know I'm almost out of time here. Our next study that we're embarking on this month is looking at advanced cancer patients, right? So we're going to be administering smoked cannabis flower to patients with late-stage cancers to treat their quality of life, a variety of assessments we'll be looking at. And this next study, I'm striving to import cannabis flower from Canada because that's my only option. Our government is forcing US scientists to import to source study drug from foreign countries, even though we have some of the best cannabis flower in the world all around our nation. The government is saying, no, we're not allowed to have any other grower besides this one supplier at University of Mississippi that has had a government-enforced monopoly for 51 years. So, so the next trial will be importing this drug from Canada, but you'll see here, this is a press release from the group in Canada that was supposed to be providing the cannabis. And I want to just mention this press release, I know you can't read this, but what it says is that the study drug that we in order to import the drug, I have to open a drug master file with our FDA and prove that the cannabis meets the GMP criteria, good manufacturing practice. And the cannabis from Canada was contaminated with 3 different mycotoxin. And it just speaks to the problems with legalization and these regulated markets. You have these giant corporate behemoths in Canada worth, $4 billion, but they can't grow cannabis that is not contaminated. It's really shameful, and I just want to emphasize how important it is to empower your own growers that are in your country rather than letting in all these greedy corporations that don't care about the medicine, that don't care about patients, that only care about the stock market. And by the way, when this press release went out announcing that their cannabis was contaminated, it didn't affect their stock price at all, because the truth is that they don't care about the medicine, and that's a really sad situation. So that's the other study that we're getting ready to do also with advanced cancer patients, is trying to treat their breakthrough pain with smoked flower. So we now have FDA approval for this study. This is going to be a multi-site trial. We're going to be comparing fentanyl, the sort of the nuclear bomb of the opioids, fentanyl buccal tablets, to smoked cannabis flower. This is a randomized controlled trial that grew from a pilot study that we did in Montreal 2 years ago, where we compared fentanyl to smoked cannabis, and the smoked cannabis performed very well in the pilot study. People got relief of breakthrough pain in 5 to 10 minutes with cannabis flower, whereas with the fentanyl, sometimes it would take an hour for the opioid to kick in. So this was really encouraging, and we want to put this through a controlled trial now. But I'll leave you with this. My effort to fix, I think all of us are wondering, why is it that patients are describing these positive, transformative experiences with cannabis, with real-world cannabis, but we're not able to replicate this in a controlled trial? We're seeing very anemic results in controlled trials. I mean, good, positive results, but not close to what patients are describing. And we think that this is because our results are being sabotaged. Think about that. For over 50 years, every single clinical trial in the US has been forced to use that lousy cannabis that you saw up there. And nothing will change unless we win this lawsuit. So we filed a lawsuit against our own federal government this year with the support of all the scientists that we work with, trying to demand that our government license other private growers for research, because we cannot continue this way. Scientists need access to options. We need a variety. There's thousands of phenotypes that are easily available throughout regulated markets, and I don't say black market, I say the altruistic market, right? There's tons of unique, diverse cultivars. All of them have different clinical properties, and if scientists can't utilize those in clinical trials, then we are failing. Our research will never be able to flourish. So this lawsuit is very important. I want to point out that we are getting real traction ran with this. The lawsuit was filed in our DC Circuit Court, and the panel of judges has already ordered the DEA to respond, and they have been responding, and they claim that they're going to process all these applications. Here you can see the court order from these judges. We're making progress, but it's not close to where it should be. Until we finally have access to real-world flower, nothing will change. So I'm going to leave you with this slide. There's a couple other things we learned from the PTSD trial that were a wonderful surprise. One thing was that many of the veterans in the study reported over the course of 3 months of smoking cannabis flower that they were able to taper off of their opioids that they were on at the start of the study. By the end of the study, many of them had gotten completely off their pain pills. So this was an important dynamic that's already well recognized in the scientific literature. You'll notice that there's a lot of survey data talking about cannabis as a substitution for opioids, for benzodiazepines, things like that. But now we're moving into doing a controlled trial to try to confirm, what is this dynamic and how. And the second thing we learned from these military veterans was that they claim that their erectile function also improved with smoked cannabis flower. Many of them started the study on Viagra. A lot of them were very young veterans in their 30s, 40s who were already on Viagra. And that was common because so many of these veterans end up getting pummeled with so many different antidepressants that cause them to lose their erectile function. So one of the other trials that we're working on, also collaborating with a Canadian producer, is to examine smoked flower versus Viagra, generic Viagra, to see how it performs in a controlled setting. So we are preparing, we have a team of urologists that's working with us, and we hope to get approvals for that by the end of the year. So I think that is, I'm gonna wrap it up with that, and I'll be around for the rest of the next 2 days. Thank you all very much. I thought, okay.
Torej imam, pardon.
I think we had a 15-minute break.
Okay. Torej ugotovili smo, da imamo še kar nekaj časa za Sju, in če je že tako daleč pripotovala, dajmo izkoristiti teh 20 minut. 15.
Is that all right? Okay.
Yeah. 45.
Let's do it. All right. I'm going to go over a couple other things, and sorry, a little premature. This, I want to just point out, the reason these studies take so long is because this is a schematic showing you the regulatory pathway of what it takes to get approvals to do a clinical trial in the US. So you could wonder, why would it take 10 years to do this study? Because these are all these boxes represent different agencies that you have to get approval from before you can start. So let me just jump to, let me see, a second here. Okay. I would tell you, so this is a study that we did with the University of Michigan. It was published in the Journal of Pain. As I told you, we've been studying cannabis as a substitution for opioid dependence now, and we've been collecting some really good data looking at the trends with patients able to get off pain pills. And so you can see there's 2 different studies that we've published in the Journal of Pain, which is great. That's a mainstream medical journal in the US that's pretty respected. And I won't go into all the details because it's pretty lengthy, but just to say, this last study, we had almost 2,500 patients. You can see there that over 50% reported that their pain decreased a lot. 30% said decreased a little. many people said that their overall health improved on keep in mind, this is real-world cannabis flower. And the medication substitution was very impressive. So what was interesting about this data was it wasn't just people getting off pain pills. They were coming off all kinds of different pharmaceuticals. So they were able to taper off their benzodiazepines like Xanax and Ativan. They were able to taper off their anti-inflammatory meds using cannabis alone. So I think this is, again, this desperately needs to be verified in a controlled trial, but it represents an important trend, and we think that it's going to be it hopefully will pan out in these controlled trials. So these are the other studies that are coming up. Let me just see, I have, so we're going to be doing a clinical trial with UCSD looking at neuropathic pain in the low back. And then we have another study with UCSD looking at HIV neuropathy. There's been a lot of great data looking at cannabis for treating neuropathy. We all know that neuropathic pain is some of the hardest pain to treat and often not responsive to opioids. So the fact that cannabis can help take the edge off of that is really important. And you can see the other, we're also going to be doing a study on bipolar disorder, which I think is going to be really valuable because many people will tell you that you're not supposed to give cannabis to patients with bipolar. So we're hoping to be able to bring some nuance to that. And then this is, let's see here. Yeah, this is another study looking at healthy volunteers that's coming up. So, and now I wanted to mention to you that we have built an international patient registry because we're desperate to learn from patients who are using cannabis in the real world and try to gather immense amounts of survey data from them so that we can start to look at trends, right? So we created a central database to collect, to capture all of this data from a variety of patients with different illnesses. And you can see that we're going to be asking them, what are they using cannabis for? What dose are they using? What delivery method? All of that. And here you can see we got a grant from Colorado State University, it's my home university where I'm on faculty, and they gave us a grant to build this this platform, and and it just went live this year. So the important point about this registry is that it's completely protected in terms of the people who enter their data. It stays confidential. The data is de-identified, so nobody's contact information will be accessible to anybody, and it's just an opportunity for scientists to learn, to look at trends. As we get into larger data sets, let's say we eventually have 10,000 patients enrolled in the database, then we'll be able to start to see trends in, let's say, looking at, say I want to do a study on Parkinson's, and I would like to look at all the patients who have Parkinson's, what are they using, what symptoms are benefiting from this. So hopefully this registry will give us a sense of that. And let's see here. And I just want to show you the home screen for this. So this is the front page of the website, and you'll notice that in the middle there's a dog registry. So this is the first time I've seen that we have a patient registry for humans and a dog registry, because we have so many people in the US now that are treating their dogs with, the dogs seem to have a very sensitive endocannabinoid system. And so I'm sorry to the cat lovers out there. Right now it's only dogs that we're collecting data on, but I think that this will be really helpful to also look at trends and what people are using to treat their dogs and how they're responding. So let me see what else. I know he said we still have some time, so I wanted to just jump through some other areas here. What else do I want to talk about? Since we're on the topic of dogs, I want to mention we have a study that we're doing at Colorado State University with our veterinary college that looked at dogs, treating dogs with CBD. And there's quite a bit of scientific literature looking at cannabis in animals. And I just want to point out, here's two really worthwhile articles. And I summarize it here, but I can share the references with you if you want to look these up. But you can see here, let me see if I have my, you can see there that we have a tremendous amount of anecdotal data, and now we're starting to get more research on dosages for animals. So I think this will be really helpful to animal owners that are trying to understand how to do this, and you can see there, in this case, we have data for dogs with osteoarthritis and dogs with epilepsy, showing how to dose this. Here you can see that was the horse study. So here, this is just a pilot study with 25 horses, but you can see that the dosages, the lower dose actually worked better in many cases than the higher dose. So it's not that just because they have such a massive amount of surface area, the horses, doesn't mean that you have to use massive dosages. And here you can see this was an example of, this is Igor, is a orangutan at our zoo in Phoenix, and this is a picture of him. He has very severe osteoarthritis of the hip. And what we were doing with him, you can see this is a big ordeal. You have to, you have to take him into surgery, put him under general anesthesia just to give him an injection in his hip for, so that he can function. You see all the staff that are involved. It's a big job. But, and this was his film. You can see it's almost pure bone on bone. He's got very severe arthritis in that hip. And it causes him a lot of, he's very withdrawn, he doesn't eat. So we started adding CBD into his diet. We just were taking raw flour, freshly harvested flour that was rich in CBD, and mixing it in with his feed. And he's showing some slight improvement. We're still waiting, we expect this to take some time. This just started last month, so but we're hopeful that maybe we can experiment with different ratios of, of different phenotypes and see which works the best. And there is the idea that, we think that there's all sorts of applications for dogs and cats and horses. You can see not just pain and anxiety, but also we talked about epilepsy, we talk about cannabis as actually curbing cancers in these animals. That's a really fascinating area that needs to be studied more, but certainly we have tons of anecdotal evidence from pet owners talking about this. And then I'll just finish with, this has been a real challenge for our lab. We started working with the professional athletes many years ago when we started looking at using cannabis as a substitution for opioids. You can imagine that the athletes were all very eager to understand this because many of them are getting hooked on pain pills during their course of their professional career, and you can see why. It's just, these sports are very brutal. There's just, punishing amounts of injuries there. And so the problem is that the leagues, that these professional sports leagues do not acknowledge cannabis as a medicine yet. So these players all have to use the medicine covertly. They're not allowed to test positive for it, and so it's been really complicated. But we're hoping eventually you'll see, we're hoping to start a study. I'm showing you pictures of football, but this could be any sport, right? This could be rugby, hockey, whatever. All these guys are getting, relentless amounts of joint injuries, head concussions. You can see this is the breakdown by player position, but it's brutal. And here is an example. This is a study that a colleague of mine did where he followed a college football player for just one season of his college career, and in one season he had 500 impacts to his helmet. So you can imagine that here's a really interesting visual of this, because you see there's the normal brain on the one side, and then the National Football League players, these are 5 different brains of players in their 40s and 50s, so not old people. These are fairly young, but look at the amount of brain loss, the loss of volume and atrophy in these brains at such a young age. So that's why these players have become interested in cannabis, not just for treating pain, but the idea of cannabis for neurogenesis, right? When I went to, or when my mom went to medical school, I remember they told her, once your your brain tissue dies, it's gone forever. Well, now suddenly we're seeing data at the cellular level showing that the endocannabinoid system is actually playing a role in neurogenesis. And this is really exciting, especially for athletes that are getting, their brain bashed in all day. You can see here, there's some clear data now, published data in peer-reviewed journals that confirms cannabis is a neuroprotectant, right? So this is really important data that even our own U.S. government, many of you are aware, we purchased a patent to make sure, looking at cannabis as a neuroprotectant, because the data now is been well documented. And this is the brain of another player. This is a young football player. You can see all the injury. It looks very similar to an Alzheimer's patient. And here, many of you saw this study from JAMA back in 2017, where they looked at 111 brains of NFL players, and 110 out of 111 brains had evidence of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And this, once you get CTE, it's a downward spiral from there. These players don't have a good quality of life, and they tend to have a very shortened lifespan. So that's why these players are caring about this. We have a nonprofit, a charity called Doctors for Cannabis Regulation, where we're trying to influence the sports leagues to allow these athletes to utilize cannabis as a medicine and as a safer alternative to the opioids that they're given so freely. So we're working on this. This is the commissioner of the NFL here. He's been very opposed to studying cannabis as a medicine, but we've presented him with a study that we would like to fund, and we're hoping that they will get on board with us. So I think I'll leave it with that. I know my time's up. Thank you all very much.